In the Hindu view, we not only find a unique view of nature relative to the modern scientific view, we also find things in there that support a healthy relationship with nature. And I'll contrast these two things to begin with. So we're talking about the Hindu vision of ecology, the Hindu ecological vision. What is it? An ecological vision is based upon the overall view of nature. This started becoming very interesting to me when I started university about 30, 35 years ago. And I gained a BSc focusing in biology, particularly molecular biology and molecular genetics. And as I obtained my degree, I, of course, took a lot of courses, and there was this view of nature that I was learning. But there were things about it that just didn't sit right. It didn't seem even realistic. It didn't seem like the world that I knew. For example, in biology, there is something called the problem of altruism. It's called a problem because we don't understand it. At least the scientific establishment doesn't understand it. Why is it there? And that question arises because of a deeper view underlying that is that competition is the only thing that's happening in nature. It's the primary thing. It may be the only thing. And if that's what we believe, that's what I was taught as I was gaining my degree in biology. If that is how it is, then indeed the question arises, how can this be? How can we understand altruistic behavior? Not only that, there's also the problem of beauty. Why is there beauty? If it's all about survival, then these are extravagant biological efforts. They're even make the organisms, the animals, more stand out rather than become camouflage. So these were the kind of questions that were being asked. And frankly, I just didn't understand that we had a view of nature that I was being taught where basic things were not understood. So what kind of view was it? It was something that was very unrealistic. If you can't even account for basic things like that. The crux of the problem, I learned, is that the basic scientific view is mechanical. When you have mechanism as the base for your worldview, as is the modern scientific worldview, it's materialist, it's mechanistic, then you have all sorts of problems accounting for mind, creativity within mind, the rise of ethics and morality in mind. It's hard to understand how mechanism plus chance, this is the basic metaphysics of modern science, how these two factors can lead to all that we see. Now, in the West, there's a history of ideas. There's a battle of ideas there historically. And so modern science comes after Christianity has its power taken away largely. The Christian view was about creation from a distant God. That itself remains unexplained and mysterious, but that's how it begins. And from there, there's creation. God is an all-controller entity. I mean, God is a concept. It gets defined in all sorts of ways. So that concept that's supposedly behind all that we see, called God, is an all-controller, is a creator. That's a very biblical idea. This is not the idea of God that I had come across in Hindu Dharma, of an all-controller God sitting distant. In fact, this situation also calls forward the idea of predetermination. God is all powerful. God determines all that happens. So even the idea of free will and freedom in the world is paradoxical. It doesn't fit. So the West moved from, we'll leave aside the Indo-European pre-Christian culture for now, which has a lot in common with Hindu Dharma because they're all Indo-European cultures. Once that was overthrown by Christianity, then this other metaphysics came up about God. And it leaves a lot of questions, of course, and it was imposed rather than accepted because there was a lot of violence involved in maintaining that metaphysics. In fact, science had a long time before it could arise in the West because metaphysical directions and questions and theories were blocked in medieval universities run by Christian power. So it's only until the 17th, 18th century we began to get some more freedom in the West. And then because of that, science is now free to ask whatever questions it wants, to explore whatever directions it wants. So science in the West has a very, very, very strong a negative view of religion because it was suppressed by religion. And with religion is this idea of creation, this idea of predetermination. It will not allow, science will not allow anything like that back in again. But, so it gives us instead mechanism and chance. So the West has had, I would say two really bad ideas, one after the other. The first one being God and creation, and then mechanism and chance. Now, mechanism and chance and God and creation. So these are two options in the West. Okay, theistic determination, predetermination, predestination, and mechanistic determination, predestination. So this idea of mechanism or predestination remains. So the idea of freedom is not there. So it's a very incomplete view, and in many ways a false view. It doesn't accord with reality. So the modern Western scientific view of all this, what is all this? Well, the answer is it's a combination of mechanism and chance. And from mechanism and chance arises all this. What does Hindu Dharma have to say? This is where we can make a very, very clear demarcation, a contrast. What is all this? Hindu Dharma says, all this is Brahma. Brahma is Satya. Brahma is consciousness. Brahma is self. I am Brahma, and that you are. So on the one hand, all of this is chance and mechanism. On the other hand, it's Brahma and all that I mentioned. Now we have to go into what is meant by all this is Brahma and how does this give us the Hindu view of nature. And from there, what is the ecological vision that comes from the Hindu view of nature? So Brahma is consciousness. That's a key statement. Brahma is Satya, it's primary. It just is. It always is. It's primary. It's consciousness. So consciousness is primary. In the West, in the modern West, we can contrast this by materialism. So rather than there being, so what we have is materialism, mechanism on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have consciousness as primary. Now, currently in the modern West, the idea of consciousness being primary is rising again. There are, the fields of neuroscience, science of mind, even quantum mechanics. All of it strongly suggests that consciousness cannot be written out of a primary description of nature. Well, that's exactly what is stated in Hindu Dharma. Brahma is primary, Brahma is consciousness. So this sets up something else as well that's very unique to Hindu Dharma that doesn't yet exist in the West. If consciousness is primary, there are very large implications of that. Consciousness is a strange term, really. Consciousness is an objective term for subjectivity. The subjectivity that we all experience as I, as self, that's the primary ontological primitive in reality. It's not something we have to go searching for. So when we want to go to the depths of reality, it shouldn't be surprising that that will be knowledge, not in an objective form, but in the form of, within consciousness, in the form of self. And that's where yoga comes in. So yoga gives us an epistemology to pursue that path. So that also doesn't yet exist in the West, but that will come when consciousness is understood to be primary, and it's nearly there in the West. Leading scientific minds are certainly in that direction. I think we'll get there in 1 or 2 generations. The other thing we can contrast is this idea that of cosmic order. Right? It arises because there's obviously a regularity in nature. Not everything is totally predictable, but there's a lot of regularity, periodicity, the cycles within cycles, celestial cycles, planetary cycles, terrestrial cycles, biological cycles, everywhere, cycles within cycles. And in the West, this is generally conceived in mechanical terms. But in Hindu Dharma, the Vedic concept is Rit or Ritam. From Ritam, we get the words rhythm, rite, as in ritual. And Rit is the cosmic order. But crucially, it's not just the physical cosmic order. It's not just the quantifiable cosmic order, something that we can mathematize and measure and so on, because there's many things that are not quantifiable. You don't quantify love, for example. You don't quantify pain, for example. It's subjective. You don't objectify love to understand love. You fall in love to understand love. Some things are irreducible. They're not analyzable. So Ritam encompasses not just the cosmic order visible to the senses, amenable via reason, but it's also amenable via one's moral sense. So here we are being told that the issue of values and morality and ethics is already existing in primordial consciousness, which is the basis of everything. This does not need to arise in evolution per se, because consciousness cannot arise in during evolution. It's the beginning. But if the view is material, if it's materialism, and consciousness is considered an epiphenomena of biology, then the whole thing is confused. So the primary battle here is consciousness primary or is it an epiphenomenon? And Hindu Dharma strongly says it's definitely not an epiphenomena. Do yoga and find out. That's how you find out. It's a direct examination of what is primary. So this contrast is very important. Consciousness primary, matter primary, and consciousness arises from matter. This doesn't work. There's just too many things that it does not explain, too many things it sweeps under the rug. But consciousness being primary opens up the door to everything. Then it's not surprising that the moral sense is built in to every creature who is sentient. Animals display this as well. They're not wanton. They don't wantonly mass murder everything around them. I mean, there's a community. There's relationships. There's ways of being. There's, it's not just a random jumble of things. Some kind of a chaotic mix. Now, and so with the moral sense already being there, but being expressed in different contexts, for this animal and that animal, these are, for a lion, the context is different. A lion kills, that's what it does. It's a predator. So, we don't call that evil. That's nature. Nature has all these things that are interdependently existing, and and they coexist, and they support each other as a viable ecosystem. The other thing I had mentioned earlier was, along with the problem of altruism, there's a problem of beauty. Why is there beauty? With the moral sense being there, we have accounted for what has been called altruism, generated via the moral sense. Yoga would say that altruism develops in a person according to their level of self-development. So it's not found everywhere in the same state, in the full state, but it's there, and it needs to be accounted for. Morality and ethics and values, they're certainly there, all over the place. And again, it's already in consciousness as a potential, because consciousness has everything. So all sentient beings, all creatures, they follow their own dharma. They have their own way of doing things. And we can say that, they're after arth and kam, prosperity, enjoyment. And within their context, they're looking for relationship. I mean, animals are social creatures. This doesn't happen if you're a machine or a robot. We're talking primordial consciousness embodied in all these forms. This is as deep as it gets. It has everything. So the idea of ethics has to come along with the notion of beauty in the following way. For this reason, what we fall in love with, what we chase in life, that's what we love. That's what we consider beautiful. And all that we want, all that we desire, we could potentially just, go and grab it irrespective of any other consideration. Is it fair to do that? Is it safe to do that? Is it morally correct to do that? Potentially, I don't need to ask any of these questions. I can just go and just do whatever I want. But that moral sense, for most of us, most of the time doesn't allow that. And that's a good thing. That's how we are. That's how nature is. That's a very important part of nature. We chase beauty. We value beauty. And there is much beauty in the world. And partly it's subjective, and partly it's so over the top sometimes, like the bird of paradise. Anyone looking at the bird of paradise doing its wonderful dance for its mate is blown away. There's an example of beauty. So many examples. So even beauty has to exist because it's something that we go for, but it's something that we go for with respect to the three of the four Purusharth. Dharam, Arth, Kam. Our approach to things encompasses these three values. And the fourth Purusharth is Moksha, which is what yoga points to. So even the whole scheme of the four aims of life, as I've just mentioned, that's a very good description, not just of humans, but also all of nature, all advanced animals. We're not going to talk about bacteria and so on here. That's a whole other kind of dialogue. Actually, can be also taken up in a different context. So the view in Hindu Dharma is that we begin with primordial consciousness. Within that, there's a valuation towards ethics that's apparent within oneself and all around. There's a valuation of what we all consider beautiful and chaste, and that's apparent all around. And that entire process of chasing that is within the context of the four aims of life, four Purusharth. Very terrific description. Now, the Hindu view of nature also encompasses the idea, as I mentioned, of dharma. All sentient beings follow their own unique dharma, their own way of doing things. And for us humans, it's very complex. The Bhagavad Gita is an example of how important this whole idea of dharma is. Sometimes part of it is, what is my duty? That's dharma. But dharma is also related to Ritam. So we come back to Ritam here, a primary description within the Hindu view of nature. So Ritam encompasses morality, the moral order as well. And morality has us ask the question of, what should I do here? What is my duty here? What is my role here? So all of that, the entirety of the Hindu view is very realistic. Another example of how it's realistic is that in the modern view, because consciousness is not considered primary but an epiphenomena of matter, then there's a very great difficulty in describing a great many phenomena. There's a terrific book that I want to mention in case people might be interested in having a look at it. It's called Irreducible Mind. And it's encyclopedic. It lists all sorts of phenomena, like near-death experiences, like mystical states, mathematical prodigies, savants of all sorts. All these are mental functions. So the mathematician Srinivasan Ramanujan seeing Devi in visions, unfolding scrolls with mathematical symbols, which he would write down. So the materialistic view of consciousness and mind can't account for any of this. The other thing that it cannot account for is what I'm going to call here the vertical transfer of knowledge. The horizontal transfer of knowledge is, I'm speaking right now, it's going through the airwaves and people are listening, we'll have an interaction and we'll take something from each other, and it's not difficult to understand that happening. That this is how something was learned, something was communicated. But the vertical transfer, is the example of the Srinivasan Ramanujan. That's some kind of knowledge emerging from the very depths of consciousness, however that happens. So there's no accounting for that in the modern view, but it actually happens. Yogic literature is replete with examples of vertical transfer of knowledge. How one shamanic knowledge is another example of vertical transfer of knowledge. So because mind is primary, because mind is non-local, mystical states, samadhi, small samadhis which involve joining with other forms, this is what shamanic knowledge is. The knowledge of what is happening over there in the river, as seen through an eagle's eyes. A shaman, the South American shaman, can see that. So how does all that work? That's also part of nature. Nature is whole, is one. Nature is also can be and is visible as many distinct beings, many distinct species, and all aspects of nature, but it's also one. So there's two ways of understanding nature. One in an objective way, and this gives us ecological view, relationships between different species, between different animals, the relationship between the health of mountains and rivers and the health of animals, the health of the oceans, how it's all this is a ecological view. And in the Western view, all animals, what are they? How are they seen? They're understood as kind of dumb, mute. It's kind of I tell you that until 1989, it was taught in the United States School of Veterinary Medicine that there's no scientific basis to believe that animals feel pain. Okay? Just pain, not even having a sense of self. That's not what's in doubt. The fact that they feel pain, there's no scientific basis. That's how far off the scientific view has been and still is. But it's evolving, and it is looking knowingly or unknowingly at ideas that exist in Hindu Dharma for millennia. The idea of a self-created universe, Swambhu, self-creation. It's not a new idea. That's how we've always understood things. The idea of consciousness being primary, well, that's how we've seen things for thousands of years. So in that context of Satya, Ritam, Dharam, Karam, animals, all animals are engaged in their own dharam. They seek arth and kam, uh, and eventually they make eventually their aim changes. Certainly for humans, their aim changes and it becomes more inward, seeking self-knowledge, therefore looking towards that subjectivity, diving into the consciousness, into one's own subjectivity, as in yoga. So, you know, that is a process that the modern scientific view has no space for. But in Hindu Dharma, we would say that if that's not there, this is very deep avidya. So the contrasts is huge, and there's no doubt that who is moving in whose direction. Hindu Dharma is not doesn't have to change to account or accommodate new findings in modern science, because fundamentally its metaphysics is sound. In fact, that's the direction that modern science is moving in, going towards consciousness as primary. Now, I had mentioned earlier that the other idea that's prevalent in the West, Christianity and science's idea of predetermination, either theistic predetermination with Christianity or mechanistic predetermination by science. You know, the idea of the clockwork described via classical Newtonian physics. Now, you know, this always was problematic because it couldn't account for the fact of all of us experiencing freedom of choice. But you see, in the West, these ideas, well, they fell into them head first, let's say, because there even began to be, and still is, a questioning about, is there free will? Okay. I mean, that's deep avidya. If there's no freedom of choice, there's not even basis for law in society, because no one's responsible for their own actions. So we head into absurdities and in fact, a strange nihilistic kind of worldview that people are tired of. That's why they go to yoga. That's why they want to be spiritual, because they don't want to be religious in the West anymore, because to them, religion is Christianity. They tend not to understand that Hindu Dharma is not a religion in the sense that they understand religion. That's why we use the word Dharma. It's much bigger than religion. You know, it's not about, is there a God or isn't there a God? That isn't the central theme in Hindu Dharma. I mean, that hardly even exists. You know, there's freedom there to orient oneself in different ways, but there's no religious wars fought over it, because it's understood that it's a way, it's a darshan. It's not something that is ontologically real, as is believed in the West, because this idea of predetermination, you know, even wondering if there is free will. Whereas in the Yoga Vashist, the seer, the Rishi Vashist, the Sapta Rishi Vashist says, translated, that fate or divine dispensation is something which has come to be believed in only because of being repeated over and over. If an external power is truly the ordainer of everything in this world, of what meaning is any action? Karam. What does anyone's karam mean if that's how it is? So this is rejected because it's obviously not the case. To even go near this would be a kind of madness. And that's how much avidya exists. That's why I left the university system, And I began to follow another study of nature via the study of naturopathic medicine in Canada. And I practiced for nearly 30 years. I just recently retired, and now I'm interested in making films on these ideas, these themes. And so the first film, Soma, the Yogic Quest, is about part of what I've been talking about, this idea of yoga and is it realistic? And yes, it is realistic. And what happens? And so these are experiences that we have all the way back from Rigveda until the present. In my own yogic journey, I also have some experiential awareness of some of the things described. So it's something that I was very interested to know about personally, as a matter of curiosity. And well, with that, I should mention that Patanjali in the Yoga Sutra says that the only thing more powerful than fear is curiosity. And I've always had that. I want to know what's happening, who am I, how does all this work, and not interested in taking answers that are not right because of following some preconceived notions or a belief system. So my own journey, as someone who born in New Delhi, moved to Canada and Toronto at 10 years of age, and lost touch with that tradition. And then in university, started learning these things, didn't quite feel right. But I was also at the time beginning to learn about Hindu Dharma by reading books and seeing that this is making a lot more sense to me. And so bringing this together over many years now, I have a sort of an integrated vision with all this over the years. And so the next film will try to bring what I've been talking about so far into the format of a film, so that it's easy for people. You hit the play button and you sit back and you gain a lot of information. And my first film, I hope you'll watch Soma the Yogic Quest. It's on YouTube. If you just search for it by that name, it'll surely come up. And it's a feature-length film. It's 71 minutes. It's filmed in India, and it goes through all the marvelous sacred sites, Ellora, Hampi, Ajanta, the Himalaya, and so on, many others, and unfolds this view, part of what I've been talking about. So part of that, what I've been talking about, pertaining more to approaching Gyan. Now here too, we can make a very important point. This idea of Gyan in Hindu Dharma it comes together with Vigyan, Gyan and Vigyan. So these are two forms of knowledge. The V in Vigyan essentially means division, so it's divided knowledge in the form of subject-object. And this is the subject of science. In fact, in Hindi, Vigyan is even translated as science because it gives objective knowledge of objects. It'll give knowledge of this body, knowledge of the world, knowledge of nature as objective, as a set of objects. This is Vigyan. But Gyan is the knowledge of what is beyond measure, the subject, self. In the West, these terms also exist, actually. Instead of Gyan and Vigyan, it's gnosis and diagnosis. But it's not understood in that way. It has been totally fractured. So the scientific view is Vigyan, but the yogic view of self, of reality, of the subject, essentially, is not in the form of subject object, it's pure subject. So here also, the modern view has a lot to learn from Hindu Dharma, right at the deepest level of epistemology, because all problems start with an inadequate epistemology. In the West, the epistemology being followed by science is called positivism or logical positivism. It says that unless something is measurable, it's not real. And all things that are measurable are objects. Measurement involves objects. Measurement gives objective knowledge. Well, again, with this epistemology in place, all things that are beyond measure will have to be considered illusory. So this has gotten so far that the philosopher Daniel Dennett wrote a book called Consciousness Explained, but it was basically what he had to say was that consciousness is an illusion. What is real is the brain. The brain is real. Consciousness is an illusion. So, this was not exactly well received because his book is sometimes now called not Consciousness Explained, but Consciousness Explained Away. So there are those in the West that, do see a problem, do want to move forward. Some of those people are looking at Hindu Dharma. Historically, that's been the case, starting with Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, Niels Bohr, and others, early physicists. Persons who are deeply into logic and mathematics already will know of the very, very deep Indian contribution and roots of these subjects. So it's something that is discouraged, but in terms of being spoken out loud, that we have been looking at India. We have been looking at, in fact, Hindu Dharma, what erroneously gets called a religion. So no one wants to say that we have things to learn from a religion. That's part of the problem. It's a PR problem. It's not a real problem because it is being looked at. So there's a convergence happening. The scientific view is looking more and more like the Hindu view of nature. And that's what I'm planning to make the film on, to show this convergence. Because I think we'll be there within 50 years. But we have to survive until then. Because the natural or ecological catastrophe is very great. So how is this to be changed? Rational arguments don't seem to work. Everyone knows, some of the things we do, some of our industrial processes and so on, they're very damaging, but we keep doing them. We want technological solutions. We don't want to change some of the things we do because it'll net less profit. So these issues are there. Question remains, how do we change? Well, there's these grand BBC documentaries on the grandeur of nature, but they don't seem to cause any change either. No matter how many times David Attenborough, is telling us in this mood or that mood, whether he's angry or whether he's teary, it doesn't do much. Well, it's because the view of nature presented in these BBC documentaries is still based on scientific materialism. It's materialistic, it's mechanistic. It shows these animals in a way that they're still very distant. Yeah, okay, there's something more known about them, but it's still very far away from what the Hindu view is. Animals, what are animals? In the Rig Veda, we're told that animals of all figures speak her referring to Vach or Saraswati. Animals of all figures speak her. Consciousness is primary. Primordial consciousness with its potential of values, ethics, creativity, beauty, moksha, satya. That's common to all, not just humans, all sentient beings. So rather than nature being dumb and mute, actually it has a depth that reaches all the way to Satya. Because of this recognition, we are told in Hindu Dharma that interfere with things as little as possible. The precautionary principle applies. But this means having vairagya. It means not grasping at things. As long as you grasp at things, then things are going to go to hell. We will destroy everything. Unsustainable desires will destroy everything. In Hindu Dharma, overall, there's this vidya that we've been talking about so far, but there's also a direction that is opened up towards vairagya, towards a mature being in oneself, a maturity that doesn't, act out, grab things, but is respectful and circumspect. So that's a level of development that we have to attain. And Hindu Dharma is also all about helping people do that in lots of ways. One very important way is via the ritual arts. And that's the last thing I will end with here before we go to question and answer. The ritual arts, now that's a term coined by the great Ananda Coomaraswamy. Not merely rituals, but the ritual arts. Within the category of the ritual arts, there's murti puja, there's yatra, there's dhyan, there's all these different avenues that in Hindu Dharma we pick and choose what suits us, what suits our aptitude. Murti puja, dhyan, it depends. They're all fine. Because what's important is where they lead us to. These are orientations. We don't argue about them. There's freedom. But they lead us towards reflection. When we go to yatras, when we celebrate the various utsavs, we pause to reflect. We may even fast, which means we don't grasp. We actually move ourselves away from things and just leave them alone and just be. We practice that. So there is a whole method that can serve us towards respecting nature. The tirthas that yatris go to, they're often in very, very beautiful natural settings. And so this also connects the nature and particularly the beauty of nature with holiness. So where we see garbage and junk, it's not, it can affect one very deeply, that the holiness itself is being impacted. We can't allow this. It becomes a stronger feeling than just an intellectual knowledge of this is not the right thing to do. But it doesn't hurt enough. So we keep doing it. It really needs to affect our heart. We feel it in the body that this is not right. And so that is a developmental ladder that we have to climb. and that is what Hinduism points to. So in all these ways, um, I think a very strong case can be made that Hindu Dharma can very powerfully help us, both in terms of vidya and vairagya, and we need the latter if we're going to protect nature. So with that, I will stop here. It's been wonderful to speak. Thank you for the opportunity. And we'll go to question answer. If people have some questions, and we can discuss some things.
Yes. Thank you, Pankaj, for this wonderful, very well thought out and reflected uh, aspects on nature, ecology, and I can feel that you have experienced it while you were talking about this. You have. You are not only talking from intellectual perspective as it happens with on this sort of discussion, but very well as a practitioner you are trying to integrate with nature, ecology. Okay, and that comes out from your talk very well. And you have covered a lot of ground, and that is interesting because on one hand we have this what you call theistic determinism and mechanistic determinism, which we are trying to compare with, let's say, Hindu view of nature, ecology, or reality. And the dominant model for the last 500 years, or if we are going to theistic determinism, it goes back to 2000 years back, then it means the Western framework of looking at ecology is in some way, or one way or another, is partial, distorted. They haven't looked at nature from a holistic point of view, as they call it, because they have lost this vision of looking at themselves deeply and nature also. Not only that, they have lost that science also, which you have mentioned in difference between gnosis and diagnosis. Okay, very wonderfully. And that is new to me also. This the origin of these words, that as you mentioned it, also as gyan and vigyan. Okay, so of course we are advancing in vigyan, maybe divided knowledge or some spatial knowledge or some specialized knowledge in some sector, but in advancing on that path we have lost the vision of holistic knowledge. So you have very well captured the dilemma that Western society is facing today, because they are seeing ecological disaster everywhere. Okay, this is not something which needs scientific study at all in one sense. It's happening in front of you. Rivers are getting polluted, you have global warming, you are polluting everything, whether it's soil, water, air, everything is. So you don't need a lot of scientific studies to prove that. But still, as you were saying, that they do not have any mechanism, okay, to bring that into practice. Okay, and that's where Hindu view of ecology in terms of vision and also in terms of practice comes in. Okay, so I think this is very nicely summarized and captured by you. I would like to just ask one simple question here. What makes an Ayurvedic doctor to explore ecology? Okay, because in Western medicine, we do not find doctors talking about ecology or nature as such. They are only talking about human body. So is it natural when you are Ayurvedic practitioner that you start talking about nature in holistic perspective?
A very good question. In a word, I would say yes, there's a difference because um, part of my training involved, my training was essentially first 4 years at university level, gaining an honors BSc, and then 4 years, 5,000 hour program at the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine. Halfway through that, I went to India in the Himalaya, and I met up with some yogis who taught me some things as well. But part of the training involves what would be considered, modern medical subjects like pathology, embryology, physiology, and so on. And indeed, all of that's very mechanistically presented. That it's all very mechanistically understood. But when you examine systems like Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, also, you have more of an ecological vision. So even in Ayurveda, we talk about hot symptoms and cold symptoms, feeling hot or feeling cold, feeling damp or feeling dry. And these are nature, this is a nature-based language. So nature-based language exists in these primordial systems, Ayurveda in particular. So when you study Ayurveda, you do come to this way of seeing things. The other thing you also see is the idea of balance. And so in treating illness from a naturopathic, from an Ayurvedic perspective, we're trying to restore balance. By contrast, in modern medicine, oftentimes the strong drugs are given which try to replace function, not augment function or stimulate function, or thereby bringing everything back into balance. But this idea of domination is there and control. It's not a bad idea on its own. Clinically, it has its uses. When you are going through surgery, you want a very hardcore mechanistic thinking in place, because you have to control blood gases and so on. But the thing is, we don't buy it as total picture of reality. It's a way of looking at things that's very useful. It's a model, mechanistic model. But in Ayurveda, the model fundamentally is ecological, not mechanical. So right off the bat, we talk about the inside as a weather system with hot, cold, and dry, damp coming in. And we also understand everything else in nature that way. Hot colors, cold colors, reds versus blues, hot taste, bitter taste, very different. Heat with light, darkness with cool, water with cool, fire with heat. So all these associations, it's a nature-based language. And it's a way of thinking that is geared towards balance, establishing balance. And therapeutics is not reduced to mechanism either, mechanistic solutions either, not just drugs and surgery. But there's dhyan, there's yoga, and in Hindu Dharma, it's all integrated. So, it's perfectly right to ask a patient to consider to go on a yatra if they want to move into a different way of being. I mean, it's not pills in a bottle, but it's actually even better in many ways. So, terrific question. I'm glad this is being recorded, because I'm going to enjoy this question and answer back just now, because it's very important and it needs to go further. Thank you.
Sir, can I ask you a question?
Yes, of course, please.
Sir, as you said, our religion have a vision that we can solve this problem. So, sir, why don't our own people believe in it, and why we have Delhi as one of the most polluted cities in the world?
Our pollution is due to modern inventions like plastic. So we're used to using paper and clay and so on in the past, and it didn't cause pollution. So one thing is just that we have materials now that make it very difficult. If we go back to recyclable materials, which we're trying to do, then these problems wouldn't exist. You could toss them out as we used to. But really, the much bigger problem, as you actually pointed out at the beginning of your statement, why don't we believe in it ourselves? That's because our minds are still colonized. We were colonized the British education system imposed, which has this view, which has us learning these sciences and thinking that that's the way of thinking. So the more highly educated a person is in India, probably, the more closely they're aligned to this materialistic, mechanistic view, which doesn't respect yoga, doesn't respect murti puja, doesn't respect dhyan and yatras and so on, sees them as old-fashioned superstitions and so on. So we have to do a job there, and the kind of discussion we're having, that's exactly what we need to do to do that job. A great question.
Okay.
Sir, another question I have to ask is that what, according to you, is yogi, and how did your yogic journey started? And have you ever experienced any supernatural things while you were meditating or you doing yoga?
Yeah, yes, I have, but I'm going to back up a little bit and say, you use the term supernatural powers, and I would say that extraordinary powers. They're not supernatural. There's nothing beyond nature. Nature is whole. So this idea of supernatural, even that is a Western idea that doesn't apply. But extraordinary powers, we're not rising above from nature. Look, I mentioned earlier that book, Irreducible Mind, with all these phenomena, siddhis we can call them, great powers of mind. They exist in the human population, they have for millennia. The more you are able to access that, then the more you're able to have access to that kind of ability. So I wouldn't call it supernatural, but we're capable of far more than we normally display. And now with yoga, the idea is meditation, dhyan until samadhi. Samadhi is where the subject-object duality is no longer, is just subject. And that is and so then that's also called self-knowledge. It's also called the deepest knowledge of reality. And that would be self-evident because there's no more wondering left what's going on. The questioning is gone. So my own experience is I've actually written about it and I hope to publish it not too long from now, but you can, if you go to my Facebook group called Sutra, Sutra, there are, I have some writings there on my experience with meditation. And for me, it was a confirmation of what I had read in various texts. So for example, in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, it says, fix your gaze upon the inner light and, awaken from history, cross the ocean of existence, of temporality. So I found that indeed, that experience, that self-experience is real. But again, it's not something that can be proven to anyone. So, but I have written about it, and and those people that are in that direction will like to look at that and probably find it interesting. But it's not something that I would ever say that can be proven in a sense of Vigyan. We can set it up in a lot of ways, so we can say it's plausible. But the yoga tradition also says that it's a subjective and it's not describable. But here's an interesting way of thinking about it. Since Einstein, we don't say matter anymore, we say matter energy, because there's a matter energy equivalence, E equals mc squared. Matter energy. Energy is another word for radiation. Radiation is another word for light. So what we're talking about is we're not matter anymore. That's old Newtonian conception. We're matter light. Materiality and luminosity. Materiality, along with temporality and mortality, as described in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, that's our condition. Materiality, temporality, mortality, death. If there's form, there's death. But there's also a conquering of death. And this happened. This is no joke. But it seems incredible or implausible if you look at it from the perspective of modern materialistic, mechanistic view of reality. But that's nonsense. If you go to Hindu Dharma, it's going to happen. Consciousness awakens to itself. And the goal of a yogi is to partake of that, to let go everything except for one tiny atom in the little toe and merge and then come back. Now, when people have near-death experiences, they also have report a similar kind of thing, meeting light, no longer experiencing time. And so in yoga, those things happen. That has been part of my experience. And it's more real than what we call real. Not to say that this is unreal and it should be disregarded, but there are levels of knowledge. There's levels of knowing. Devi Vach. Right in the Rig Veda, we're told that Vach exists as 4 levels of knowledge. Speech is only the most external portion. The deeper you go, the further away from speech it is. It's more bhav. It's experiential. It's a feeling. It's described as Satchitanand, Anand bliss. And I can say to you, since you asked me the question, bliss is off the charts. It's Anand, it's Shanti. Now, back to Einstein. It's also light. In the Rig Veda, there's an association with light, identification with light. The seer Vamdev says, I was the sun. This idea of identification with the sun is in the Upanishads. Buddha talks about it in his very first teaching. He says, I was filled with light. Patanjali talks about it. Abhinav Gupta talks about it. Hatha Yoga Pradipika, people today, including myself and others, we talk about it. Now, E equals MC squared. Energy, light equivalence. Matter, light equivalence. Light traveling at the speed of light, space and time no longer apply. Form no longer applies. It's light. And death no longer applies because at the speed of light, there's no time, no application. So indeed, my own experience was exactly like that. And it was a lengthy experience in Dhyan, so it wasn't something that was fleeting. I was able to be with it and examine it. So the experience is of being light rather than matter. Materiality, no more. Luminosity instead, like the texts say. And no longer impermanence, not something that lives and dies, comes and goes. So beyond death, just as the Upanishad says, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says, lead us from asat to sat, from impermanence to that which is, from tamas to jyotir, from materiality and temporality, which is tamas, darkness, heaviness, matter, from materiality to luminosity, jyotir, and from mrityu to amritam, from death, immortality. This stuff's for real. And we shouldn't be surprised. We're only surprised because we are embedded in a completely faulty worldview. So from the point of view of materialism, yoga makes no sense. But does materialism make any sense? It doesn't make any sense. Once you drop it, then we don't need to be incredulous about these things. This is nature. This is a very deep view of nature. It's a very accurate view of nature. To have these experiences is nothing to boast about. It's something that is a potential for every being. One of the things I learned through meditation is that one can experience one's own body in one's inner vision as made of light. In fact, differentiated light, like the chakra system. Red's down here, blue's up here. And when self-experiences of the body is that, then there's a kind of a fluctuation of all these bands of light. And it can become still if you become still. But then if you think about, if you have a thought, if you think about an object, an herb, a food, the light pattern fluctuates. That is information there for you. Now, to me, I believe, because of that, very clearly, that animals have that all the time because they don't have concepts and thinking as we do. Because we have that, we lose touch with this deeper kind of knowing, deeper way of knowing. Animals will have that. So that's how animals know, we say instinctively, what to do, what to eat. How do they know? They didn't go to school. They weren't taught anything. We call it instinct, but that word explains nothing. It's just a word. But if you have a self-experience, which is very in touch with everything, that if you get near something that's dangerous for you, then it shows you. If it's something that's amenable to your well-being, it shows you as well. And again, that book, Irreducible Mind, people have these abilities open up sometimes in different ways. Great question again.
Sir, I am very curious about this thing. So can you guide me from where I can start and how to start meditation?
Well, you come to my Facebook group, Sutra. Please join that group.
Okay.
And there's a lot of material there that I can point you to, that I trust, because that's why it's there. And you can get involved in some discussions that we have there. There's nearly 1,500 people in that group. And we have discussions and we help each other and we point to sources and so on. So there's no short answer to that, but I can point you to somewhere where there's a lot written about that. I would love you to join.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Rajesh, now you can ask next question.
Yes, sir. Hello, sir. Thank you for this amazing lecture.
Oh, thank you.
And sir, hello, sir. So my question is about, as in Hinduism, we believe that God is everywhere. God is in human, animal, and trees also. So, sir, we see many Hindu eat non-veg. So, is this good in religion or bad?
Well, look, if you are the Inuit living in the north, I live in Canada. In the north, you can't even grow food. It's ice. So traditionally, there's been hunting. So it's very context dependent if you look at the human population. Now, where that's not necessary to do, certain human societies have decided that they're going to be vegetarian. I think that's a wonderful idea. I think it makes, but you need, in order to do that, you need a dietary system like Ayurveda that makes it possible for you to be vegetarian and healthy. In the West, people are just learning how to be vegetarian in a healthy way. There's a great direction in that direction is opening up due to moral and ethical concerns and partly health as well. So now you mentioned at the very beginning of your question the idea of God being in everything. The word God is defined in different ways. And the most common idea about God is something that's separate, that creates everything. Now, if you have another conception where God is everything, then you kind of disempower this other idea of God. So if God is everything, God becomes kind of like a meaningless term. It's not that God is everything. Is that, you want to call it Satya, but that's also us. So that Advaitic vision, non-dual vision, that there's no more God to blame for anything. There's no God, as described by something external that makes even your actions pointless if it's controlling everything. So that's not how it is, as we hear in the Yoga Vashishta. So all that's happening is God doing it to itself, which is kind of a ridiculous kind of statement. If everything is God, God becomes meaningless as a concept. We are in a new realm called non-duality. And so there, Atma. Atma goes through a process of becoming completely wrapped in avidya and slowly awakens. And there are stages to this. And the high stages are completely altruistic. Stay away from non-vegetarian food, but beings at different stages are moving towards that. I think that's how I would look at the situation.
Sir, you said you have went to Himalaya. So what is this thing about Himalaya, Mount Everest, that it is mystical? People say there is some mystical force.
A good question. Somehow it is, because of the tradition of Hindu Dharma existing for thousands of years historically, whereas in other places, a similar kind of knowledge was wiped out by Christianity and Islam, which have a different approach. So it may be that the Himalayas are not a special place per se, although they're pretty darn special, I would say, except the situation is that in other places where we would also have found this kind of culture, it's not there anymore. That's what I would say, rather than pointing to Himalaya as a special place in an objective way.
So now next question is from, I think, Ankur. Ankur, you can go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Pankaj, for this wonderful talk. It was very enlightening. I have it's very it's a privilege to hear people like you who are yogis themselves talk about ecology, because we generally don't have that in the public domain. I had a question that is very often asked, especially in the West, that there is usually a debate between ecologists and economists, and there are generally two opposite sides of the debate. So it gives us the impression that we can either save our ecology or we can develop our economy. How do you think that Hinduism can offer a fresh perspective to this debate?
Well, the valuation of life in Hinduism is far greater than any mechanistic view can offer. So that tips the scales. It brings in the precautionary principle. And so the damage to natural systems that our actions might do, this would be a more important concern from the point of view of Hindu Dharma. Life trumps money any day. The fact that it doesn't, well, that's why we call it Kali Yuga, because this is wrong. And, we can say that the Dharma is taking a beating. Arth and Kam are standing by themselves as the objects of our attention, But if Dharam was also there, then we would have a more balanced. We need a balance between these. I mean, uh, we don't need to do things in a destructive way as we do, except it's profitable. You've hit the nail on the head, and we're caught um, in the system, and we're trying to change, but it's very difficult.
Anyone else? Okay, so then I'll take one question before someone else come up. Uh, Pankaj, you mentioned about Ritam, okay, and you connected that with, of course, it literally means cosmic order. And when we say cosmic order, it includes, ritual and art together. And here it brings me, your emphasis on beauty also. Okay, so can you just, please elaborate on beauty, aesthetics, order, and rituals together? Because they are so deeply interconnected in Hindu thought. And that's where, it comes from vision to practice. Okay. So how do you see beauty interconnected with ecology and with practices and all these coming up together? Because this is, one way I think we can change the practices and vision of people in 21st century.
Yeah, we certainly have a big job to do, but those are the factors I think that would be the most successful. With Ritam, Ritam also discloses a moral order. So we feel something is right to do or not right to do, and sometimes it's 50-50. We're not sure. Sometimes we're really sure. Sometimes it's perfectly fine to do, but we make these determinations all the time. And one of the ways we make this determination is if we're harming or hurting something, if and how do we find out? Well, it complains, it cries. Um, the other thing that our moral sense is horrified by is when beauty is replaced with chaos. When a beautiful forest is replaced by a trash pile, it just hurts. Unless you're dead, in the mind dominated by other ideas, so much so that you that's not something that matters. So beauty is where beauty exists. We know it and we favor it. The yatras take place in the most beautiful places, or very powerful places, waterfalls and sangams, joinings of rivers and high mountain peaks and so on. Its obvious beauty is extremely important to us. In human life, we beautify ourselves to attract partners, spouse, mates. So we know all about it. We act with it all the time, but the scientific view has no place for it, so we pretend it doesn't exist. So with the ritual arts, I'm going to use a yatra as an example of partaking in the ritual arts. So when I go on a yatra, I'm going to be headed to, let's say, Gangotri. And when I get to Gangotri, I'm going to be blown away by how beautiful it is, as I was blown away when I was there, as everyone who goes there is. And, when you come back from that and you see the damage, the ugliness, the pollution compared to the pristine nature at Gangotri, then you can see the difference. It affects you. So we need and not only that, it seems like we've attacked the holiness of the place itself when we damage it. So these are intangible, subjective things that we seem to have lost touch with, but they're fundamental in nature. I mean, when you look at nature, when you look at all the birds and the animals and the markings and different kinds of fur and the calls and the dances, and it's mind blowing. And yeah, are we supposed to believe this all arises from chance? It's nonsense. So what is it? It is an expression of something very deep within Vach. So of Saraswati, of Satya, of reality. We know when reality flowers and is fragrant and beautiful. And but we routinely damage all of that and cause pollution instead. And in India, that's also the case. And when people are caught in systems, they do things they wouldn't do ordinarily. So there's a lot of things behind why the problems exist. And I feel that going to a yatra brings up deep feelings compared to, taking a neutral trip somewhere. So it's got the potential of changing us internally. And that's what we need to do. So it's got that chance. I don't think anything else has that chance. I hope I hope we have time to go back, because it's very damaged right now.
So interesting. And I would like to add one more question here related to that. So when you're talking about ecology and beauty and the transformation that happen through when you go to the, nature's space, okay, pristine nature space, and you see that transformation happening. So does it happen only to yogi, or it can happen also to the people who are materialistically minded, who believes in materialism and not, consciousness is a primary or something, they are not trained as yogi, they are not trained certain yogic discipline where they can truly get transformed through these nature spaces.
I think it's certainly open to everyone. That's for sure, because I've been to yatras at different stages of my life, at stages where I was just learning about yoga. And I was still greatly affected simply because of the beauty of the place. And also that when I was at that place, the temple there, the murti, the rituals, the respect given and so on, it also connected me with holiness. So a yatra, because it can bring us near that place of seeing things as holy, I think that's why it works. So it's not about a yogic transformation. I don't think anything quite that radical is required, thankfully. But we need to have experiences that bring us in touch with that. Now, I've met yogis in India that have been on a continuous yatra for decades. That's what they do, place to place to place. Anyone who does that, that's a different life. That's a different experience. You're going to become a different person. So to the extent we make the effort to situate ourselves in such a circumstance, that much then we can experience a degree of transformation. But how much better when the entire culture stands together and encourages everyone to do this rather than discourages. So we have that culture. It's attacked by overly intellectualized minds who have studied modern mechanistic science and bought into it and think everything else is superstition. So the more we move away from that, the more we come back to Hindu Dharma. I mean, when I learned about it, little by little by little, I learned about it by reading books and talking to people, going to India and so on, because I was cut off from it since I moved from India to Canada. But when I came across it, it blew me away how good it was, how beautiful it was, how holistic it was. You know, I was studying ideas like holism and so on in the university, but here was an actual holistic system. Ayurveda was an actual holistic system. So I was blown away by these things. And Indians, Hindus, I mean, you don't need to be a Hindu, Indians of any background, all Bhartiyas. This is our tradition. Even people that are Muslims or Christians now, their ancestors were from this whole line where Ayurveda and so on, all these things are very, very important. So any Indian, any Bhartiya ought to be able to appreciate this and to get a hold of it and so on. And then the idea of religious affiliation is quite secondary. Hindu Dharma, portions of it are very amenable to anyone and everyone. And Hindu Dharma as a whole is incredibly holistic, elevated. I've never seen anything even come close to the beauty of Hindu Dharma. In all the ways that we've been talking about in this session, we have to make people aware of that more and more. So we have to keep having these conversations. Filmmakers have to make more films. Writers have to write more books, and so on. We have to keep doing that. We'll get there.
So you mentioned that this compartmentalization or isolation of matter and consciousness is an artificial compartmentalization, and in Hindu conception, everything is manifestation of consciousness. So earlier in the Western thought, they did not consider the animals and plants as conscious or sentient beings, but now more or less slowly they have come to accept this. Now I'm talking about the material elements, because in our conception, we have these Shanti mantras where we speak of Aushadhis and Vanaspatis and Dvipade or Chatuspade bipeds and animals. We also talk about elements, apa or water, to remain calm and pacified, and we pray for them to be auspicious towards us. So would it be correct to say that even the gross matter in its grossest form, in the elements, the consciousness is involved in gross forms of these elements also? Can we say that in our consideration?
Well, I think so, but and we can also add to that. Hindu Dharma is compatible with pantheism, but we can understand pantheism in different ways. It's either that everything is conscious or has consciousness, right down to the elements. And that way of looking at things is very powerful. It becomes part of the ritual arts as well. It's something that's part of yoga culture as well. Now, the elements, they arise as we're taught in via Sankhya, right? So in Sankhya, the elements are also understood as the objects of the five senses, 5 elements, 5 senses. So in Sankhya, we're actually shown that the senses and their objects are dependently arisen. So there's no difference. Here is another very formidable form of holism, interdependence. Now notice that if we consider the question of what came first, seed or tree, chicken or egg, man or woman, one requires the other for its arising. Okay, it's circular. In the same way, the five great elements and the five senses circularly arise, or arise in a circular way. So the elements are also within consciousness, and it's perfectly all right to look at that conception that way. Now, there's many models. There's 140 elements in the chemical system. There's 5 elements in Sankhya. There are different kinds of enumerations that are possible. But Sankhya is very special to me because of the 5 elements and the 5 senses and the interdependence. It's very realistic. Even when we go back to Purush and Prakriti, we're told that Prakriti dances when Purush glances at her. Until then, Prakriti is inert, formless, only potential. That sounds like the language of quantum mechanics. So until consciousness glances upon the elements, the gunas, nothing happens. But when that connection is there, when that attention turns towards it, when that measurement is made, then there is the arising of form, the arising of measurables, and so on. So Sankhya is very deep. I feel that Sankhya is what modern physics is looking for. Just as I feel that Ritam is what the modern Western worldview is looking for as its base. We have so many things in Hindu Dharma, and all of that around the 5 elements, the Bhuta Shuddhi, it's part of it. So it's integrated into that. It's integrated into Dharam, which is related to Rit, which connects to Satya. So it's gorgeous. It's fabulous. I just love this whole view, the Hindu Dharam. I've never seen anything deeper, more powerful, more beautiful, more complete, and very certainly including what you brought out, what it makes possible. More power to the 5 great elements in our lives, and our relationship with them may it get deeper. Great question.
So Hinduism can offer a lot to the world because of the holistic perspective that it has. And we have many intellectuals or researchers who are well versed with this truth. However, why do we not find a single voice on the international platform informing the world about ecology from an Indic perspective? And rather, we find a Swedish kid asking for ecological justice.
Well, it's a matter of time. I'd say let's keep a perspective here. For most of recorded history, India, Bharat has been the place where people have come for knowledge in all sorts of fields. Now, that got disrupted over the last few hundred years because of colonialism. As colonialism is now more and more a thing of the past, India comes into its own. This is exactly what's going to happen, is happening, starting to happen. It might take another 20, 50 years to get there, so that it's significant. I would say at that point, then we'll be back to normal service, resuming normal service, how it's been for most of recorded history. The Indian voice, the Hindu dharmic voice, has been extremely powerful, except lately. It's our fortune or misfortune to be at a time where historically it's unusual that way. But we're also fortunate, I think, because we're at a time where we're seeing it come back. Okay. I tend to avoid the word Hinduism now. I prefer Hindu Dharma. Hindu Dharma is on its way. I think it's a great time to be alive. Why it isn't there as much right now is because it's been suppressed. And as that suppression lessens, the voices rise. So we're having this discussion. There's a film that's been made about yoga from its own point of view that I mentioned earlier, Soma, the Yogic Quest. That film is Hindu Dharma from its own point of view. Not once in that film is the word religion mentioned because it doesn't apply. So we need to have that kind of effort, and we have to be continuous with it, and we'll get there. And I'd say normal service is resumed. It's on its way. It's always been that way. Recently it's not, but we're going back there. And it's our efforts that are going to do it. So another great question. Let's keep going in that direction.
So I think this is a really, really inspiring message that we need to keep going, because we need to tell our stories, as you mentioned, through
Sir,
films.
can I ask one question?
Uh,
Sir, do you think, sir, our modern means our modern culture is going in direction of Western culture? Means our youth is accepting more Western than Indian. So, sir, do you think there is a problem in that, or in my perspective, I think if this happens a lot, then we will forget our culture. I think so.
Well, I'm not as pessimistic as you are, but I don't think that's going to happen. I see the Indian voice getting stronger and stronger on the world stage, politically, and as that happens, and then if it gets that stronger and stronger, and it's going in that direction, voices such as ours are rising. The internet makes communication much more easily possible. You don't need to have mainstream New York Times under your belt. So I think there's many reasons for me to be not pessimistic. And being pessimistic may not serve us anyway. But again, I'd like to point you to that fact that for most of history, Indian ideas have held sway. It's going to go back there again. For a couple hundred years, it wasn't that way, but there are reasons for that.
okay. Anyone else? Okay, so there are no hands raised here. So I'm assuming that this was last question. And Pankaj, it was wonderful interacting with you. And I think we should have a lot more sessions with you for our students on those who are enrolled in Indian Knowledge System course. Okay, because there's so much to talk about. You come from this Ayurvedic perspective, yogic perspective, you bring all this together, and one single talk is not enough to talk about all these things.